Thank you all for coming tonight, and welcome to the 2023 City Council Candidates Forum. I'm Edith Snyder, Voter Services Chair for the League of Women Voters of Falls Church. The League is a nonpartisan organization dedicated to encouraging informed citizen participation in government. The Falls Church League was created in 1951 and for 72 years has been working to create a better community. For the November 7th local election, we have 3 open seats on City Council and 3 on School Board. The City Council race is what brings us here tonight. We hope this forum will help you make your decisions among the field of 4 talented candidates sitting before us this evening. The League is pleased to co-sponsor tonight's forum with the Falls Church Preservation and Improvement Society. With me here is Mark Gross, President of VIPIS.
Hello, everybody. I'm happy to see many of you here. Some of you know about VPIS, some of you don't. We are probably the oldest, if not one of the oldest, if not the oldest community or organization. We've been here since 1885, on and off. Some of us are, the original members. We present some civic activities. Some are concerts at treasures. We also listen to things, going on at the council and comment. We often have forums about issues, and we attempt to preserve some of the history of the city so that we know where we were and if that helps how we got here. So our timekeeper tonight is Annie Rhodes. She'll have her cards about time, and then at 0, she has a gun, so that will speed up the answers. Sandy Tarpanian and I will look at the audience questions and see if some want to be asked, and moderators are Mary Chavez and Wendy Freeman. So you all want to hear the next comment. I'm done.
Thank you, Mark, and I'm going to turn it over to our moderators, Wendy and Mary.
Thank you.
Do you want this all now?
Thank you. Our goal tonight is to minimize rules and procedures and maximize time for the candidates to speak. Wendy and I will explain briefly how we will proceed. As you can see, the candidates are seated alphabetically at the table. We will rotate who receives the questions and answers first. We will begin by giving the candidates 2 minutes each to introduce themselves, explain why they are running, and highlight their priorities if elected. We will then ask each of the candidates to address 2 questions in 1.5 minutes each that the League and VPIS believe are of critical importance to the city.
Next, we will ask each candidate 2 questions that VPIS and the League have developed for them based on their campaign materials and public statements. Again, candidates will have 1.5 minutes to respond to each question. Then we will ask questions of specific candidates from you, our audience. Thank you for providing questions as you entered the forum tonight. If you have another question, please raise your hand, and we will bring you an additional card, and we'll collect and bring your question forward. Next, we will give each candidate 1 minute to reply to a response from another candidate or to ask a question they did not receive but wished they had. We will ask each of the candidates to take 1.5 minutes to address a third question that the League and VPAS consider important to the city. And finally, we will close with 1-minute statements from each of the candidates.
Again, we are going to rotate both the opening statements and initial questions. The specific candidate questions and responses, and concluding questions and statements along the row of candidates. Our timekeeper will alert speakers when they have 15 seconds remaining and will then indicate when they have run out of time.
We would like to remind everyone to please turn off your cell phones. We also ask that you not take flash photos that might distract the candidates. Falls Church Community Television is streaming the forum live tonight, as well as recording it for replay on VPAS and League websites. The forum sponsors own the content of this event and must provide their approval for any other use. So we begin with the opening statements of our candidates with Erin Flynn. Ms. Flynn, you have 2 minutes to speak.
Hi, I'm Erin Flynn, and I just wanted to first thank VPAS and the League for hosting the event tonight and for all of you for joining us. It's an important election. It's an interesting election in that both Mayor Tarter and Councilmember Duncan are stepping down from the council, so I also wanted to thank them for their service, and because the composition of the council is changing. So it's an important opportunity for all of you to get to know more about our candidacies and what it is that we think we bring to the table in terms of the council's work. So by way of background, I ended up in Falls Church through my husband, Charlie Lord, who grew up here and graduated from city schools after a number of years of kind of visiting Falls Church back and forth from Washington, D.C. Charlie and I decided to move here to be closer to family and to raise our son in Falls Church. My in-laws have lived here for 35 years. We have a first grader at Mount Daniel, and when we moved here, he went to preschool at Doolin and has now, entered Falls Church City Schools. And one of the reasons that brought us here was because we recognized, how special of a place Falls Church is and how unique it is in terms of its community-mindedness, having really highly involved and engaged residents, excellent schools, local businesses, and walkable tree-lined streets. And they're the things that we appreciate about the city and the things that, I hope as a council member to embrace in council's work and to treat as unique and important as the city changes and grows. The things that I hope to bring to council is a responsiveness to community concerns, policies that enjoy strong community support, and really policies that move us forward together. I think that my background, I've been in DOJ for 15 years, allows me to do that and do it well.
Great, good evening. Thank you to the League and VPAS for hosting. My name is Letty Hardy. As much as I like to think of myself as a newbie, I am the only incumbent up here. I've had the privilege of serving you for 8 years now, and I'm running for re-election because I am committed to a city that continues to work towards being more vibrant, inclusive, and sustainable. So a little background about me. Former financial services executive at Capital One. I have 3 boys who are now 11, 13, and 15. So experience in all the schools from Jesse Thackeray to now Meridian. My husband was also a lifer. My in-laws live in the same home they did about a mile and a half away where they raised their boys. And we just had our 20th anniversary of moving back to the city. And that's important because we moved back home as actually newly married young professionals, young 20-somethings, years away from having kids. So unlike many of my cohort who moved here for the schools, we didn't do that because we were priced out of Arlington. And it was precisely that 20-year anniversary that was one of the factors that pushed me to decide to run for re-election, because it would be impossible for today's 20-something to recreate that. And it's probably true for many of you or many of your kids in the audience, thinking back to whether to be able to come home. And that just doesn't seem quite right. It is this different season of my life now where both, as my kids are getting older, my parents, my in-laws are getting older, that our responsibility to the future, from everything from housing to the environment to a more walkable and vibrant, bikeable city that works for all generations, is that much clearer to me, and our responsibility to that future. So I ran to be a new voice 8 years ago, and I represented multiple generations in the city, which drove all the priorities that I hope we'll have more chance to talk about shortly. And I'm proud to have a hand in each of those results. Over 8 years, I had promised to serve with transparency and thoughtfulness. I bring strong communication, organization, analytical skills, do my homework, understand the details, ask questions. For anyone who watches city council meetings, you often know I'm the one that asks the most questions. I'm the first to host office hours. I've written a weekly blog now for 8 years that hopefully many of you read. I believe that active citizen engagement is critical, and I've seen the results of that pay off. Even if we disagree, I share my thinking on a weekly basis and find common ground with you to help make local government more accessible. I'm grateful to have met many of you that listened and served our community. I hope to earn your vote again this fall. Thank you.
I'm Tim Stevens, and first of all, I too want to thank the League and VPUS, especially for choosing this place called the Senior Center. I just turned 73 a couple of days ago, and I feel very comfortable in a place called the Senior Center. So my pathway to involvement in the city is through my interest in the environment. When I stopped working, I started looking at what I thought were the most important issues, and the one that bubbled up to the top was concern over climate change. So I got to know Councilmember Dan Z and local activist Dave Eckert, and they persuaded me to get involved with the city, and particularly join the ESC, and I did that and eventually became chair. And it turns out that there are a lot of ways to get involved in the city through volunteering, and I tried out a lot of them over the years, so including joining groups such as CBC, the VPUS, and the Chamber of Commerce. Now it's Bike Falls Church, the Falls Church Climate Action Network. There's a lot of good organizations that one can become involved with here in the city. So for me, it's been interesting over the last 30 years to kind of watch the city mature and evolve. Back 25 years ago, it was pretty much the schools, are they getting enough money, and how do I commute to work? Those were the main issues. But we've gone way beyond that now, and it's been very interesting to me and very gratifying to see how we've developed as a city where you can do a lot of things just here and not have to go someplace else. And it's wanting to see the progress that we've made over the last dozen years towards that result that encouraged me to get involved in this campaign. And so I look forward to hearing your questions and having further discussion this evening. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Justine Underhill. Thank you to the League and to VPUS for hosting this event. Thank you all to coming out on a Thursday night here. A little bit about me. I am a second-generation Washingtonian, and I did a rough calculation. I've spent 80% of my life within a 15-minute drive of Falls Church. But throughout my career as a journalist, for the other 20% of my life, I've had the opportunity to live in a bunch of different cities. And by living in different cities, I got to experience some of the best of other places, and it started to make me think, what can we take from other places and apply here in Falls Church, especially regarding connectivity, community, and overall life happiness. And it's astounding how urban design and community design can influence our daily lives in a very real way. It determines whether or not you bump into a neighbor on the walk to the grocery store. It determines whether your kids can go out and be independent. I am running for city council to use evidence-based practices to help create a more thriving, sustainable little city. And so on city council, my policy priorities would include improving walkability and bikeability with safe routes to school, affordable and diverse housing, broadening our tax base, and environmental programs to make sure that we grow sustainably. The Sierra Club has even endorsed my candidacy based on the environmental practices of my policies. In addition to serving on as an elected official in DuPont Circle, my work as a journalist has actually positioned me very well for this role. I know how to research the intricate layers of city policies and the implications of them. And my time serving on the Falls Church Housing Commission has given me a solid understanding of housing policies as well as the challenges that come with them. Thank you.
With the conclusion of Ms. Underhill's statement, we move to the question and response portion of this forum. The first question will be asked of all candidates, beginning with Ms. Hardy and followed by Mr. Stevens, Ms. Underhill, and Ms. Flynn. The question developed by the League and VPAS is, as a member of City Council, who and or what would you say you serve?
Thank you for the question. So as a member of City Council, I ultimately serve our constituents, our residents. I think we are elected by the people, and so the government represents the people. We also represent the businesses as well. While they don't have a voting official vote, because often they don't live in the city, I think it's important to think about my constituencies as both residents as well as business owners, because they make up a big part of our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. We do serve all the residents, all the citizens of all ages. A lot of times it's difficult for people who are younger or maybe have a disability to make their views known, and I think it's important that City Council reach out and try to represent them as well. The business community is extremely important, as I'm sure we'll hear throughout our discussion later this evening. So all citizens need to be represented, and it's incumbent upon City Council members to make sure that they're knowledgeable and receptive to hearing from all citizens.
Ms. Underhill?
Thank you. I completely agree that we need to make sure that we are not just reaching the people that come to us, but getting a wider reach, going to apartment buildings. That's something that I've actually been pursuing, is trying to reach out to people that don't normally show up to City Council meetings, but also weighing the people that do reach out to us and making sure that voices are heard. We want to make sure that we have an engaged citizenship, and so responding and having sit-downs, coffees, office hours, whatever else. So making sure that City Council is going out there, but also making sure that City Council is receiving comments, whether it be from the business community, from citizens, from people who shop, from people who work here. I think all of that is an important part of our calculus.
Ms. Flynn?
I agree in terms of representing the local citizenry and residents here, and thinking about Falls Church, is a place we all call home, and want to share, values and be good neighbors to one another, and also good neighbors to our surrounding jurisdictions. What I will say about my background at DOJ is that I've worked on civil rights issues for over a decade, from voting rights to disability rights to fair housing to policing and police misconduct, and really view it as important to really think, broadly about what makes for a strong community, and identifying stakeholders early and often, and going to people who may not always be the people who, show up to meetings but do have a strong interest in decisions, and making sure that their voices are heard, that they understand the implications for them of the city's decisions, and that we take everyone's interests into consideration. And sometimes they may be competing interests, and that we grapple with those decisions and what it means for different members of our community in order to reach an appropriate balance where we all feel like we're moving forward together. Thanks.
The second question that we will ask of all candidates, beginning with Mr. Stevens, followed by Ms. Underhill, Ms. Flynn, and Ms. Hardy, is as follows. The city, its residents and developers must work together to protect our environment and reduce our climate footprint. What are some ways that the City Council could encourage and incentivize city residents and developers to take steps to protect our environment? You have 1.5 minutes to answer this question.
Yeah, well, development plays a large role in trying to control our emissions, and I'm actually very glad to hear the question, because in past years we might not have even heard such a question, so it's an indication that we're making progress to have you ask that. In terms of new development, there's the traditional accreditation like LEED, but we really need to go quite a bit beyond that these days. look for additional ways to reduce emissions. One of the things that we've done recently on the Planning Commission, where I'm currently chair, is to ask, and we've gotten agreement from new developments to put in all-electric appliances. And this will help with emissions because gradually the grid will get cleaner as renewable energy comes onto it. So to the degree that we have all-electric, then we will benefit from reduced emissions from that. There's a lot of other ways, certainly encouraging people to use transit rather than driving individual vehicles is an important way to reduce emissions. But I think on new development, just getting it to be all electric is a great step forward.
Ms. Underhill.
There are a lot of interesting ways that we can incentivize buildings to be a little bit more environmentally friendly. Things like green building design guidelines that include building orientation. That's something that we should be thinking about as we maybe want to put solar panels or increase shading. Things like living rooftops, emphasizing biophilic designs where we actually have greenscapes on the buildings themselves, renewable energy integration. There are a lot of things that we should be thinking about and having forward thinking so that these buildings are integrated into the community. But it's not just the buildings themselves, it's also how we're designing the streetscape. So, does the streetscape encourage walkability? Does it encourage people to actually want to go by it on a bike? And so thinking about it holistically rather than specifically just the building, I think is very important.
Ms. Flynn.
Thank you. So I think that our residents, businesses, boards and commissions, and civic groups all need to work together and can kind of harness our collective power in this area. I support the recently adopted Government Operations Energy Action Plan, which seeks to bring more solar into government buildings and to update, city fleet, both for the schools and the local government, to have, more electric vehicles, better EV charging stations. For development, I think it's important that we're paying attention to the stormwater implications as the climate events worsen, that we're looking for both gray infrastructure and green infrastructure, that in looking at our energy plans, we don't put our urban forest management plan to the side, but that we actually integrate that into the CIP projects and greening more of the city. One of our shared values is the tree canopy that we have in Falls Church that we're proud of and that we need to maintain. And so I really support, additional steps that we can take both in our business and commercial district that we are allowed to do by state law that we haven't yet taken to increase the tree canopy and to also use the full extent of the council approval process to make sure that we are getting development that serves residents' interests here and is that it's appropriately scaled and responding to the environmental concerns in a way that we all appreciate. Thank you.
Ms. Hardy.
Great, thank you. So I'm glad that this question came up because as one of the 3 Sierra Club endorsed candidates, this is something that we're all passionate about. So with new development or upgrading existing projects, I think transportation and buildings are the 2 largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a lot we can do. On the private sector, we've definitely raised the bar by requiring that new projects are LEED Gold, if not higher. We should also adopt green building standards because we certainly can't rely on Richmond to do that. As Tim said, we started negotiating for electric-only appliances in our most recent projects. On the private side, we can encourage private homeowners to green their homes with energy audits, improving efficiency, electrifying systems. A common misconception is stormwater. People think that when we do new development, stormwater actually worsens. We actually, with every project, stormwater improves because often what replaces is actually old parking lots and impervious surface, and we actually are able to capture stormwater. For example, under Founders Row, these giant cisterns actually capture water, and so stormwater is actually improved with new development, and that's a common misconception. The other way that I think development can actually improve and protect our environment is that all of our projects are actually net fiscally positive with the exception of one, which has been neutral. And that is important because that helps us reinvest back into our community. So with every project, we get voluntary concessions that improves our streetscape. We add sidewalks, which encourages walkability and shifting mode share. But that money that we get from mixed-use development, we get about $4 million a year from the 9 projects so far, allows us to invest in things that the community cares about, like making sure our community is greener, and we invest in sidewalks, tree canopy, and other things. So I think development and environment are not mutually exclusive. We've actually been able to do both very successfully in Falls Church. Thank you.
Now, we are going to ask each of our candidates specific questions based on their campaign materials and public statements, beginning with Ms. Underhill. Your question is, you have stated that the city needs to create accessible sidewalks, especially for those navigating a double stroller or a wheelchair, and build more protected bike lanes. How would you, as a council member, see that these goals are met while balancing the often competing requirements of parking, bike lanes, sidewalks, and healthy trees along city streets?
That's an excellent question, because when you think about our public space, there is a limited amount of space that we have. And so there are a lot of different competing interests for that limited space. When we're thinking about things like bike lanes, I actually see that as part of a holistic view of the city, specifically that when we encourage more people to bike and walk, that would hopefully end up reducing the amount of people that need to drive. I drive now, and I'm taking up parking spots from people that actually need it. Whereas if I felt safer to bike around Falls Church, then I wouldn't have to take up, and if there were places for me to park my bike more frequently, then I wouldn't have to take up a parking spot. So thinking about the people that live nearby and making sure that they can get around without a car will actually end up freeing up spots for other people. So I do think that if we can dedicate some additional space to biking and walking, we can actually end up with it'll be easier for people to find places to park, and it'll be easier for people to get where they want to go overall. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Underhill. Now it's your turn, Ms. Flynn. Your question is, you have stated that local development needs to deliver on the benefits it promises. Do you believe that recent development projects have delivered the promised benefits? If not, how would you ensure that future development projects do so? You have 1.5 minutes.
So I think it's a mixed result. I appreciate that we're adding more housing to the city. A lot of the recent development has been things that have brought us permanent affordable dwelling units. Falls Church overall over the last few decades has become, and most recently, far more uniformly affluent than it was. I know from Charlie's childhood growing up here, he often talks about, how he lived in a much more socioeconomically diverse Falls Church than the Falls Church that exists for our students today. So I do think it's important that the development, brings in affordable opportunities for people to join our community and to enjoy the resources and amenities that we have here. Where I would say that the development has fallen short is in a lot of the high-profile vacancies that we have. So we have buildings like Founders Row, where a lot of the ground floor retail space has been empty for 3+ years. And when we look at the commercial revenues from that development, oftentimes, they don't reflect that the commercial aspects of those properties aren't as vibrant and aren't performing as well as they could, because the residential aspects of the commercial development go into the commercial revenues. I also think that those developments could be greener and have more green space. Something like Founders Row is, 4 acres, and the city negotiated for that development, and yet we have only less than 7% green space, most of which is in the city right-of-way. So I would hope to use my position on council to really negotiate for stronger agreements that do hold developers accountable and get us the results we want.
Thank you, Ms. Flynn. Ms. Hardy, our question for you is this. You have advocated for housing for all. How do you respond to citizens who live in single-family zones and want to keep the zones limited to 1 single-family home per lot or 1 duplex per lot, as is now permitted in R1B zones? You have 1.5 minutes.
Great. Thank you for that question. I am passionate about housing. So the reason I'm passionate is because addressing the housing crisis is a responsibility we share with the region. So we shouldn't solve it in isolation. I don't have a prescribed answer on what that looks like. I think we should look at best practices and strategies that are working elsewhere because it is a regional and national problem and figure out what would work in Falls Church. I think regionally our goal is that we need 300,000 more units by 2030. And so clearly Falls Church is a part of that. Specific to single-family zoning, zoning and land use policies certainly are options because it could provide more housing choices. And I think having more diverse size and price should be an overarching policy goal. So what do I mean by that? Things like cottages. The cottage project, which we done 3 or 4 years ago now, has won multiple awards. That is a great example of more unique middle housing that begins to address what I call the barbell issue. We have a whole bunch of single-family homes and a whole bunch of apartments. And so you think of someone who wants to downsize from that $2 million home, what's the latest option? We haven't built townhomes in this community in 20 years now. When someone outgrows their 2-bedroom apartment, where do they go? I don't like that the answer is you have to leave Falls Church, because that is not the kind of community I think we should be in. So I certainly think we should try to incentivize keeping smaller and renovating homes versus all the teardowns we see. I think we should carefully study the housing reforms across the United States, beginning with accessory dwelling units. I think a lot of these are not overnight silver bullets. They are incremental, but I do think that it's important for us to study and figure out what works here and figure out how we can add housing choices so the only option for people is not to leave Falls Church. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hardy. Mr. Stevens, your question is, you have experience serving as a volunteer in the city and on the Planning Commission. During this time, is there an area in which you think the city could have improved its actions? Please provide a 1.5-minute response.
I like to think that the city's actually made a lot of progress on the time that I've been volunteering across a number of areas. Clearly, the issue that's of most importance to me is the environment and climate change. So given that we have a long ways to go to get to our goals, there clearly is a big gap in terms of things that we really need to be doing. So that's one area where I would like to see more progress. I think we've actually made progress in terms of assisting our commercial arena. I think it's interesting to look at places like Arlington and D.C. that have built very large standalone office buildings that are having a very hard time filling those buildings now. But in terms of Falls Church, we don't see that. Our commercial vacancy rate is actually very good. So I'm very, very pleased at the progress that the city has made to improve this very important area of the city. Thank you.
We will continue with specific questions for individual candidates. And the first one this time around is going to be Ms. Flynn. Ms. Flynn, you have observed that city government is operating with many vacancies, and some city workers are performing the duties of 2 or more employees. As a council member, how will you ensure that city departments have the personnel and tools needed to fulfill their missions?
Well, I think this goes to council's important oversight role. I think a lot of council members and the public were surprised when we went through this budget cycle and saw how many vacancies actually existed in city government. So there are, about 250 or so city employees. There were 39 vacancies this last year. A third of them were in the Department of Public Works. And I think residents, noticed the difference in the quality and the reliability of the services. And so one thing that I would hope to do on council is to have more regular staffing reports so that we're actually aware of how the different departments are staffed, where it is that we're seeing vacancies, what residents should expect in terms of kind of triaging of services for those reasons, and then why it is that we're having trouble, recruiting or retaining employees. Last year, the city undertook a classification and compensation study, which I support, to make sure that we are paying people competitive to other jurisdictions. I think it's important both to do targeted outreach and have large kind of postings to increase the size of your candidate pool to try to get a number of individuals who apply, and then give them opportunities within their organization for increased responsibility, to look for what mentoring opportunities are available for them so that they can see themselves in a place where they grow, and that we talk about, the importance of the mission and the importance of their work and the recognition in the community that we can give and the appreciation that we give for employees here. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Flynn. Ms. Hardy, in recent years, the city has approved development that will add about 1,800 residential units, mainly apartments, and may approve plans for 200 more. Should the city delay consideration of further significant residential development until these new units are completed and occupied, and the city can determine their impact on infrastructure, services, and revenue? Please provide a 1.5-minute response.
Great, thank you. I'm a numbers person, for those who don't know. The correct number is actually 1,481 units are coming online in the next 3 years, so not 1,800. But yes, we do have a lot of projects underway, but they're largely apartments, some senior housing, and one condo building with 1 to 2 bedroom units. Real estate's also cyclical. We are lucky to catch the wave when interest rates were low, before financing dried up, before construction costs also escalated. And these projects are helping offset a lot of the cost of the high school and all the other services that we want in the community. I don't think we're going to see that kind of boom again, given how much conditions have changed in the real estate market. So no, I don't think we should necessarily pause, because I think it's creating housing types that we do want, but we also still have a gap in other kinds of development that we do want in the Falls Church. So the middle housing types that I talked about that we don't have, something larger than a 2-bedroom, but not quite the 5-bedroom, $2 million home, I do think is still important to create in Falls Church. I think a lot of the things that we talked about in upcoming developments, we actually forecast impacts already, everything from school capacity, traffic, service costs, environmental impacts. And contrary to popular belief, developments to date haven't crowded schools, they haven't increased traffic, they haven't worsened stormwater, as I talked about, they haven't reduced tree canopy. I blog about all of this and more. So I do think that we are giving this lots of careful thought with every project, and I don't think it merits an absolute stop to development.
Thank you, Ms. Hardy. Mr. Stevens, you have stated that the city needs to acknowledge and prepare for national trends. A trend you identified was equity in our codes. What city codes or policies do you believe require adjustments to achieve more equity?
Well, the whole issue of taking a look at our zoning codes is kind of a long-standing piece of information that's known within our planning department. Many of these codes, for example, the T-zone code, were written in the early 1950s. And one of the reasons why I think it was important to take a look at that is because it has been 70 years, since that code was developed. We do need to start to take a look at what other jurisdictions have done in terms of their codes and how they're dealing with equity issues. A lot of times, things were put into zoning codes, maybe unintentionally, but it's had the effect over the years of causing kind of a rigidity in our population. And we're kind of headed right now in the direction of having a much wealthier level of population. And I think we need to question whether or not, in terms of the viability of the city and where we want to be going forward, do we need to take a look at our zoning codes and see if there are different ways of doing that? There's other issues beyond just equity as well. Some of the most beautiful buildings in the world were built before zoning codes, so it's not necessarily the be-all and end-all, but I would like to see a revision and a relook at our codes take place. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Ms. Underhill, you have suggested that the city needs to create more opportunities for renters, city workers, and seniors to stay in the city. Please describe some of the specific opportunities you would advocate if you were elected to the city council. Please provide a 1.5-minute response.
Serving on the Housing Commission, there have been a few things that have come to us that have been really interesting, one of which is talking about granny flats or backyard accessory dwelling units. A few people have come to the Housing Commission to ask about whether this is something that they could do for their parents as they age or for themselves as they look to age in place. So that would be one thing that we could look at in terms of gentle density. And that's something that other places like DC and Arlington have already put into place, so we have the data and we can look at what works, what doesn't work, and have that as a community discussion as something that we could implement. Other things are thinking about possibly other ways that we could have gentle density in our areas. Maybe some of you guys don't know, but on Great Falls Street, there's actually a triplex in Falls Church, and you wouldn't even know it walking by, but it's there. And so thinking about other ways where we might be able to welcome more people, also thinking about building design, especially for seniors. That was a big part of an AARP event that we held, was talking about how we can design homes that are being built right now in Falls Church so that people can access them even as they get older in age. Thank you.
We turn to our audience for our third round of candidate-specific questions. We will ask one question of each candidate, drawn from residents attending tonight's forum, and selected by our question sorters, Ms. Tarpinian and Mr. Gross. We will begin this round with Ms. Hardy, followed by Mr. Stevens, Ms. Underhill, and Ms. Flynn. Ms. Hardy, at Tuesday's council meeting, you characterized neighborhood concerns about T-zones as, quote, fear-based, unquote. These concerns included tree canopy, building height, entry-level housing. What, if anything, have you learned about community involvement through this process?
Thank you for the question. Sorry, I was distracted by the question there. So I think the earlier question about community involvement is important because I think I have a proven track record of engaging the community. As I mentioned, I've been writing a blog for 8 years. I was first to hold office hours. I kind of understand how to explain complicated topics and listen to constituents and making sure we go to the people. In the case of T-zones, I can't count the number of hours that we spent in public meetings and actually in my personal office hours and group of office hours to make sure I was hearing from a diverse perspective. I think the question about the concerns being fear-based is probably mischaracterized. What I was actually trying to explain is that I understand why there were concerns, because when change happens in a community, that is scary. I think in the case of tree canopy, there's probably a misunderstanding about what actually is done in T-zones. Currently in T-zones, there's actually no requirement for tree canopy. I don't think that's very well known today. So someone could actually cut literally all the trees down in a T-zone under the rules before we pass the ordinance. What we adopted on Tuesday night is actually requiring the maximum that's allowed by Virginia, which could be as much as 15% tree canopy, depending on the density there. And so that's one place where I think there's just a misunderstanding in the community of what tree canopy can be done. Another place of what's currently was allowed in T-zones before is there actually is no impervious limits. You could literally cover an entire T-zone with a parking lot, an impervious surface. And so that's another place that we improved with T-zones by putting an impervious coverage limit there. And the final one that we didn't have before is the rear setback could actually be at 0 feet. We actually improved that by making a rear setback of 15 feet. So there's a bunch of details with T-zones. T-zones is a really complicated issue, and I think over time we've realized that people need to understand the details and need to be discussed multiple times before, so that we could have careful deliberation in the community about T-zones. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stevens, what guides your decision when there's a conflict between your own vision and concerns of the residents?
Well, I feel like anybody in a position such as City Council or any of the other boards and commissions have to do their best to make that blend between listening to the community and making sure that time is spent understanding it. But yet you do these things, you become a volunteer, you get involved because you do have ideas and principles that you feel are important. And so I think it's just, there's no formula for reaching that balance, but I think you do need to take into account both the desires and wants of the community as well as the principles that caused you to want to be involved in a board and a commission or city council in the first place. Thank you.
Ms. Underhill. The Falls Church City Survey of May 2023 shows that only about 2% or more bike. With a population of 15,137, that is equal to less than 350 people. So why are we so focused on biking for so small a group of citizens?
Well, I think part of the reason that so few people bike in Falls Church is because our bike infrastructure is not up to par. I do believe that people would we have the W&OD trail that goes right through Falls Church, which is an amazing asset, and yet so few, 2 million riders or trips happen on that trail every year, and it's very difficult to get people into our shops and businesses here simply because the connections to the trail are not safe for a lot of people, especially for younger kids and seniors. But it's not just biking. I do believe that walkability and bikeability go hand in hand. So making sure that our streets are safe for people to walk and that they're encouraged to walk and as well bike. And it's not that, even though 2% of the city bikes, I would hope that we can actually get that number up to be even higher in the future, especially as we think about our environmental footprint and what we want the city to be like. Because cars, by the way, I drive to the grocery store, so this is not, about, being anti-car, but there are other consequences that cars take that I think we're taking into consideration. Things like the fact that there are accidents and there's also safety issues. There's brake dust. There's also all sorts of other issues that cars pose beyond just the gasoline issue. So thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Flynn, how will you protect small family businesses that are threatened with displacement and high rents with these new larger projects?
So this was something, and one of the reasons that I became involved in the Eden Center conversation very early on in the East End small area planning. I kind of saw the city council engaging, I do think, in good faith and with best intentions about what the East End might look like and a vision to kind of bring more development there and better bike and walking, networks, but did it without the involvement of the Vietnamese business community there and without understanding fully, the concerns that the business owners had. And part of the reason that the business owners couldn't participate in those conversations is because they were happening at, City Hall, or they were happening on the weekends at local community areas where, the prime time to go to Eden Center, if you go there, is on the weekend. So the business owners are not going to be at the places. And so it really took the community showing up to city council and unfortunately feeling as though it was fighting with local government in order to feel as though it was heard in the planning for its own community going forward. And so for me, it's being really intentional about the development that we are envisioning, what the spillover effects are on local businesses, whether it increases, the costs on those businesses, where it is we're thinking businesses are going to go when we redevelop, parcels. I've talked to, the business owner at Action Music, who used to be where Founders Row is and now has his business on Park Avenue, and had a lot of, insight from him in terms of how the city could help support local businesses as, it grows.
Thank you. This question is for Ms. Leddy. While the schools are the main focus when it comes to youth in Falls Church, how else are you planning to support and engage younger generations now and future generations as well?
Thank you. I think this actually relates to kind of a point I made earlier, is that it's important to invest in the entire community, right? Because while actually only 30% of our households actually have kids in schools, and things that make it a great place to live extend far beyond schools. So thinking about the youth, what makes it a healthy, great place to live? Having green space, parks, sidewalks, be able to get around. My own kids, for example, my 15-year-old now doesn't want to drive. He can walk and bike everywhere in town. And so thinking about those investments and how to make sure that that works for the entire generation is important. They also have, now walkability is also not just having the sidewalks, but actually having destinations too. And so when I think back to 20 years ago when we moved back in town, we certainly did not have two restaurants that were named in both the New York Times and Washington Post like we just had this week. And so I think having both options to walk to, as well as having safe places for them to get around town, are important for the next generation. Thank you.
Mr. Stevens, what actions or policies have you publicly advocated or supported that you believe improve the lives of Falls Church residents?
Good question. Certainly on the Planning Commission, we've tried to focus on ways that we can improve our buildings, to improve the lives for our citizens. There are certainly a lot of ways in groups like Bike Falls Church, where we've taken an active role in trying to improve biking facilities and getting especially protected bike lanes, which we don't really have any today. So there are many of the groups that I've participated in also have many actions along this line. The Falls Church Climate Action Network is trying to promote ways to improve our energy efficiency. That was mentioned the other night at one of the city council meetings, where just a simple action of working in advance when you know you're going to have to replace your heating system, to look at an electric facility rather than a gas facility. If you wait till the last minute when it breaks down, then you probably aren't going to do much about doing the right thing. So there's a lot of opportunities that our boards and commissions provide to improve the lives of our citizens, and I encourage everybody who's not on a board and commission to think about joining one of them and sharing your knowledge and expertise. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Ms. Underhill, you are an advocate of volunteerism. How would you encourage citizens to volunteer for city commissions, boards, and programs?
So that's something that I've actually been actively working on and trying to do community building. Some of the volunteer work I've done has been through throwing parties. I recently had a lentil party in my backyard. 70 people in Falls Church showed up to that, which was amazing. But that got some people involved that wouldn't have necessarily been involved in any sort of community event. Other things, including I've been going to, this is starting very early this year, I was doing a one-man band where I was going to apartment buildings and bringing pizza. I was paying for all of this out of my own pocket, and through that I met about 80 people in apartment buildings, getting them engaged. Some of them have even applied to be on commissions, and so making sure that we're reaching out to people. I've been going door to door as well, but specific, not for my campaign even, just to let people know about a housing project that's going on in their neighborhood, to try to get people involved and engaged and understanding about things that are happening, because I do think that when people know what's going on around them, it creates community, people are happier, and I think we can form a lot more consensus and bring people together. Thank you.
Ms. Flynn, you have suggested that the city should explore tax incentives, specialized districts, and small business grants to encourage and strengthen local businesses. Can you provide some examples of these?
Well, yeah, I mean, other jurisdictions do it. I guess most recently, Fairfax County, for example, their Economic Development Authority has been, giving grants and incentives out in order to help local businesses make aesthetic improvements. I think it's something that Falls Church could explore in terms of helping local businesses, retrofit those businesses to become more energy efficient, and some of the buildings that, aren't as energy efficient as we would like them to be, but also aren't, slated for redevelopment. And they're spaces, older spaces, where we want, businesses to stay, because they're not going to be able to pay triple net lease rents in some of the newer developments. So I do support that. There are, cultural districts in a lot of areas throughout the country where they're cultural overlay districts. And so as developers come in, there, are different, programs and kind of community awareness about, the contributions of different groups to the city's history. The Tinner Hill neighborhood is possibly, coming up for rezoning and recognition. I would like for the Tinner Hill district, as part of the 75th anniversary of the city, to have more cultural awareness and protection for that neighborhood, as the Historical Commission has sought. So there are definitely places to celebrate in our community and to protect through our laws more forcefully. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Flynn. Ms. Hardy, what will you do to reduce traffic danger against vulnerable road users such as pedestrians and people on bicycles?
I love this question because walkability is something that has been a top priority for City Council. So no one can argue that pedestrian safety is one of the top concerns, especially post-COVID. I think drivers have just been more reckless. And so a number of things that we have done and are continuing to do. So coming this fall, we're actually getting pedestrian hawk signals at 3 intersections at Oak, Berry, and Fairfax. We have red light cameras already in the city, and actually just this past week, we authorized our first pilot of speed cameras. We just got that authority from Richmond, although be it the application of it is limited to school zones. Based on the consultant's recommendations, we are implementing them in the 800 and 900 block of West Broad Street. So that will help the most egregious speeding. Unfortunately, Richmond has pretty limited authority for us. We can only use it during school times, but I would love to continue advocating for that. Enforcement clearly is key, and that's something that we've continued to fund in the budget with extra officers to address kind of that reckless behavior I talked about. And these are all multiple tools in the toolbox. There's no, again, one silver bullet to address walkability and safe streets. Street redesign ultimately is what often is the solution, right? Because people often speed when streets are wide and straight. And often things you'll see in the community are things like bump outs, extra parking on either side, because that will naturally make cars go slower. So we do have to use absolutely all the tools in the toolbox, everything from street redesign, enforcement, electronic enforcement, and even really some simple like low-tech solutions. Something called LPIs is leading pedestrian intervals. We've implemented them at 9 intersections across the city where you essentially get a head start as a pedestrian. And so low-tech solutions like that can be just as effective, and we're exploring all those things across the city. So you can tell we're pretty comprehensive in trying to address walkability and safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Letty. Mr. Stevens, any thought to encouraging and facilitating electric transportation that seniors can use locally?
Yes. If any of you have been over to Mosaic, you might have had a chance to ride on their autonomous vehicle. It's electric. It kind of runs on a circuitous basis and takes some traffic off the roads. It strikes me that our West Falls development will have this nice kind of area right in between that will go right to the West Falls metro station, and we could have a autonomous electric vehicle running on a continuous circuit there that would remove some cars off the road. It would also very nicely connect to the bus rapid transit that eventually is going to go up and down Route 7. So I think we can look for electric vehicles to improve our lives here in the city. Many of you probably know we put in the city put in the electric chargers at City Hall, so that makes it convenient for people to drive their electric vehicle, park at City Hall, and hopefully walk to one of our restaurants close by. So there's just lots of opportunities to improve our lives through enhanced electrification. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Ms. Flynn, how would you guarantee that new development has more green space and tree canopy? Oh, sorry. Sorry. Go ahead.
Okay.
Sorry. Sorry.
We'll get back to you. Ms. Underhill, how do you plan on funding the city's public schools? Through redevelopment or higher taxes?
That is always the fun part of City Council, is figuring out where to pull money from. Right now, the 8 mixed-use buildings, actually we'll have updated numbers soon, but the 8 mixed-use buildings in Falls Church provide about $4 million annually to the city. $2 million of that goes to the schools. So there are, and I would say that a lot of these buildings actually provide, as Letty mentioned, places to walk to, or things to do, or places to go, or people that can live here without a car. So I do think I would be more on the side of making sure that we don't have to raise taxes on people, because what I've heard going door to door is people are fairly upset about, feeling like they're being pushed out. They've lived here for 50 plus years and they can't afford to continue to live here. And so that's where thinking about where our money is going to come from, things like the Quinn Project, things like the West Falls Project, actually do provide both services to the city in terms of, helping us build our schools, welcoming more people here, as well as providing funding for necessary city services.
Thank you, Ms. Underhill, and apologies, we're flying by the seat of our pants here with these cards coming in. Okay, Ms. Flynn, once more with feeling. How would you guarantee that new development has more open space, more green space? Honestly, I can't read the handwriting. I can't tell if it's open or green. It looks like green space and tree canopy. Thank you.
So I do think the city can do more on this front. State law, you have to kind of be permitted under Virginia state law oftentimes to be able to impose ordinances or requirements. Luckily, Virginia law does allow you for business and commercial districts to have a minimum 10% tree canopy requirement. We haven't actually imposed that requirement in the city, so I think that's a simple first step to have for new business and commercial development here. I think our residents recognize the importance of trees to helping to manage stormwater, provide shade, which helps with, the amount of electricity you're using, to counteract urban heat islands, and to just, provide an aesthetically pleasing and environmentally beneficial and economically beneficial place. Fairfax has recently updated its street tree requirements to get kind of better, bigger trees from the very beginning, and recognition that its activity centers, which, Falls Church, we're an activity center too, have been creating urban heat islands and are actually hotter than the other areas of Fairfax County. So those sorts of requirements in terms of what our actual street tree requirements are. And, as we do development, I do think it's important, for the city when it has council leverage to look for actual green space and not turf pads, but spaces that people want to enjoy and come together in because it's green. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Flynn. We will now give each candidate 1 minute to reply to a response or to answer a question they did not receive but wish they had. Mr. Stevens, we'll begin with you, followed by Ms. Underhill, Ms. Flynn, and Ms. Hardy.
Okay, I think for that one, I will select a question that I'd like to answer, and it kind of goes as follows. Why is it worth it to make the effort to spend both our own and local government money to address climate change by reducing emissions when our impact is too small to make a difference? This is a question that I've pondered, and I can easily imagine many people contemplating the same question. Because we're so small and global warming, by its very name, is so large, we could completely eliminate all of our emissions, and it would have zero impact on the global situation. And so one could naturally ask the question, well, why bother? And I think for me, what it comes down to is our younger people. I find it impossible to consider our students at Meridian today and what their lives will be like in the future if they see that we're not making some kind of an effort to reduce our emissions. So it's really all about the students. Thank you.
I would like to talk a little bit more about biking and walking and clarify some of my answers. Specifically, I want to make it clear that I'm not planning to turn Falls Church into a giant bike lane. That is not part of my plan. What I care deeply about is mobility for all ages and abilities. So some people need to drive, some people need to walk, some people choose to bike. And so making sure that people feel safe to choose all of the options available to them, and using what other places do, including like what works in other places and applying that here. Savannah, Georgia is a really interesting example where they built parking garages on the edges of their town, and they use that to fund a shuttle that goes throughout the town that frees up space in the street that also makes it safer to walk around, and a much more pleasant experience for both biking and walking. Thank you.
Ms. Flynn, yeah.
I lost track of our order.
You're good. You're good.
I would say that the question, I guess I maybe wish I had been asked is prioritizing kind of our housing needs. There's a lot of interest in Falls Church about housing and what's next, right? We've done the larger development and consolidated the bigger parcels. We've now kind of unlocked residential development in T-zones, and I think there are questions about the direction of council. Is it towards accessory dwelling units? Is it towards upzoning in single-family zones? And I would say my priority is looking at what is going to happen with the residents at the fields and what is going to happen with the affordable dedicated dwelling units at Pearson Square for all the development that we have done over the last few years and the affordable dwelling units that we've added to the city. We are actually going to lose overall 100+ of our most dedicated affordable units that are at 60% AMI or less. And so with the limited staff and resources that we have in our planning department, I really want to ensure that we're using those to develop strategies to actually not displace those residents and keep them in our community. Thank you.
My turn now, right? Great, thank you. So the question I guess I would have wished I was asked was, what's the major difference between you and the other candidates? So obviously, as the only incumbent running for city council, I think experience and relationships matter. I have 8 years, obviously, serving the community, delivering results, partnering with our school board, our boards and commissions, staff, the business community, civic groups. I built relationships with our regional, state, and federal officials. As the smallest jurisdiction in the DMV, good relationships are really important because we have to make sure that our city's interests are represented at various levels, and we partner with our larger neighbors to further our goals. Speaking to the schools in particular, 5 years ago, I think before we had a revenue sharing, I think budget season was always filled with much more rancor, and there's way more peace in the valley now. We have both parity with salary increases, the revenue sharing agreements worked well, we actually have a 2.0 version of that. At the state level, we are getting $3 million from Virginia for improvements at Oak Street, $9 million for stormwater, not to mention $10 million last year, and those real dollars matter in a small city. And so I'm proud that I have those relationships and that experience to carry us forward. Thank you.
Thank you. We are now asking all candidates for a 1.5-minute response to a third question that VPUS and the League consider important. The city is going to invest a great deal of money into Park Avenue as a great street. There has been concern about limited public input. Do you believe the process thus far has been responsive to citizen input and will result in a product the city can be proud of? Ms. Underhill, we'll begin with you for this question.
So as somebody that's gone to City Hall to advocate for more bike parking and other infrastructure with Park Avenue, I have felt some frustration about the process. But I also understand from talking to city staff, they have $10 million of funding and they don't, it's money that they don't want to keep sitting on. So there's pressure to push this through. Right now, I think we're past the 90% point in terms of getting this plan, moving it forward. I think the improvements that have been proposed will be better than what we have now. Could it be even better? Yes. And this is the issue with City Council. Do we keep deliberating on something and maybe spend years trying to figure it out? Or do we push something forward that might not be the best, but we actually can get results soon? And so right now, even though the plan isn't where I would like it to be on a lot of fronts, I am glad that it is moving forward, and I think we will end up with a better situation on Park Avenue and a better street than what we have today.
Ms. Flynn, we'll turn to you for the same question.
So I have been unhappy with the Great Streets project. It's an $11 million grant project. It's going to be transformative for our downtown. A year ago, the city had its walking tour at the 30% phase. Many of you may have been there, but it was large turnout, and there were a lot of questions about not only the Great Streets project, but spillover effects for other local streets. There were questions about is the bricks the safest material? How do we underground to make more unobstructed streets? What are the spillover traffic effects? How is this increasing, walkability? How do we keep the trees? And after that, the council had asked the city manager to have another public forum at 4050 before the 60% design plans got finalized and basically cemented the right-of-way. And the city manager didn't come forth to council and let the council know that the 60% design plans were submitted to VDOT without coming back to the community and sort of responding to those various concerns. And I think that's a problem, right? City council has an important oversight role. The city manager, the city attorney, and the city clerk are the three employees within the province of the council. When the council asks the city manager to come and have community input before designs are finalized, I think it's really important for the city manager to do that and to not blow past deadlines that council sets in order to have actual responsive plans for community concerns.
Ms. Hardy.
Thank you. So I actually agree with both what Justine and Aaron said. I think Park Avenue project is going to be transformative, and I think it does a decent job of balancing multiple competing interests, which often is the function of city council. So the main goal of it was to improve kind of walkability and multiple modes of transportation. And so what you're going to have on Park Avenue, it will have a super share for bikes. It's not the dedicated bike lane that some people want. It will improve walkability with wider sidewalks, bump outs. It'll be safer. It'll throttle traffic volumes and speed, so it will slow cars down. It'll underground all the utility poles that you see on Park Avenue that obstruct and make it inaccessible for people in strollers and wheelchairs. Is it perfect? No. Often I think we can't let perfect be the enemy of the good, though, because it does do a lot of good things. The places where I am disappointed is actually around the brick sidewalks, because that's something that we've actually had discussions on. Brick sidewalks, I know, is emblematic of what Falls Church looks and feels like, but over time we've realized that brick sidewalks are slippery, and they're also expensive to both install and maintain over time. And so I would have loved for a discussion to happen on whether brick sidewalks should be the new standard going forward, or can we use something like stamped concrete and pavers, which have the look of bricks, but is far cheaper and far smarter for us to invest in. So that is something that's actually in the council work plan to revisit, but the Park Avenue project does need to continue so that we don't lose that $10 million in grant funding, because of all the other good things that are happening in the Park Avenue project. I do think it is important to move forward. The one thing I will note is that there's actually no tree impacts. That's another one where there's a pretty common misconception. The latest report from the Park Avenue plan is that no trees are going to be impacted as part of this, so that's also good news. Thank you.
Mr. Stevens, the same question.
Right. The question kind of touches on one area of the city where I think some improvement could occur, and that's within our Department of Public Works. To their benefit, there's a lot of problems coming out of COVID that they had to endure with significant staff reductions. That's made their job more difficult. But notwithstanding, I think it's clear that organization needs some help. It needs some areas of improvement. In particular, the Park Avenue project is one where the communication out to the public was very difficult. And sitting on the Planning Commission, I get a lot of information, and so in a sense, I've got an advantage. But still, we went from 30% to 90% with basically no public input. So I would definitely like to see some process improvement, and I'm hoping that the recently announced reorganization changes that the city indicated, which does involve Department of Public Works reporting into a new deputy manager now, that will help try to give some focus and get them back to the level of service that many of us who've been around for a while remember from a couple of decades ago when our Department of Public Works was really quite an organization to be proud of. So while I agree with my colleagues here that we probably need to push this along for a lot of reasons, but looking back over the process, I think it's an area where a lot of improvements can occur. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. We are miraculously a little bit ahead of schedule. So although we had a minute scheduled for closing statements, we are now drawing to the end of our forum, and we'd like to give the four candidates a minute and a half to say anything they would like in conclusion. We will begin with Ms. Flynn, followed by Ms. Hardy, Mr. Stevens, and Mr. Underhill. Ms. Underhill.
Well, thank you again. Thank you all for joining. Thanks again to VPIS and the League for hosting. I've enjoyed tonight and welcome the opportunity to answer questions and hope that, as the next few weeks before Election Day progress and as we get into kind of weekend voting, that I'll be able to continue to have conversations with many of you about different topics and issues that are facing the city and, what I think I bring to those areas in terms of how I think about things. What I hope, as I said in the beginning, to bring to council is a real responsiveness to public concern, is to grappling with difficult issues that the city faces with the level of, growth that we're undergoing, all the benefits that come with that growth, as well as the growing pains that we experience because of it. Those are often, competing concerns. And I think that one thing I didn't touch upon as much is my sort of professional background at DOJ. I've been with the Justice Department working on civil rights issues for about 13 years now in both a line attorney and a supervisory capacity. And a lot of that work is recognizing who are the identifiable stakeholders, getting their input early and often, figuring out what are the pressure points in decisions, what are the counter arguments that you need to weigh to make an outcome and a project even better. And so I hope to listen to a cross-section of views to get the best possible results for our community. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity to chat tonight. We've accomplished so much in 8 years. I'm proud to have a hand in getting us caught up on all the infrastructure, from the new high school, the library, city hall, parks, all the walkability, investments in sidewalks, traffic calming, big strides in affordable housing. We are adding 50% more affordable housing stock in the next 3 years. Public art, a more vibrant, walkable city powered by sustainable development that has actually lowered your tax rate lower than it was 13 years ago. And I'm running for re-election to keep working for a Falls Church that is vibrant, sustainable, and inclusive, with an eye towards the future, because this election is going to be about whether we take on that collective responsibility to live our values and truly leave the city better for next generations. The hard work of the past 8 years gives us the opportunity now to be really forward-thinking. Some of you heard me talk about coffee shops and murals as actually a metaphor for the city. 8 years ago when I was on city council, there was one mural in the city, and that was the Fox's Music mural with Elvis on it. We have since now added 9. If you can believe it. A beautiful mural at Founders Row, a mural at the blacksmith shop, and one in Mr. Brown's Park that is a great nod to our history. We can preserve, celebrate, and build on the best of what we have. Our city is more beautiful and vibrant because we've made room for more, and I'm proud of that progress and the results that we've delivered. We are a beautiful, thriving city, and I hope to earn your vote. Thank you.
As I think about the state of the city right now, I think in many ways we're fortunate to be here in Falls Church because our schools are great. We're small enough that it's easy to access our government. Our local economy is doing well. We have engaged citizens. We're getting new places for shopping and dining and entertaining all the time. So we have a lot of things to be very proud of and a lot of things to enjoy here. For sure, we have some huge problems that we have to be dealing with. Climate, of course, is one that's very much of interest to me. Affordable housing. A few years ago, that wasn't an issue on my radar screen, but people have kind of educated me, and I see that now as something vital that we have to work on. So my approach, if I'm elected, is to work with people. I find it's the only way to get anything done. It takes 4 votes on city council. So yes, you can have very strong views on a particular subject and use city council as a soapbox, but it's probably not going to get very much done. So I very much support a collaborative approach. I support making adjustments where necessary, making compromises in order to be able to continue to move the city forward. As I said, I really appreciate the progress that we've made over the last decade, and I very much would like to be a part of making sure that that continues. Thank you.
Just want to say that I love being part of the community here. And being part of a community also means that we have responsibilities to each other and to the community. We have a responsibility to make sure that we can, that everyone in the community can afford a decent standard of living, and that we can be good stewards of the environment, both locally and globally. In addressing that responsibility, I also see that we have an opportunity here. We have an opportunity to make our city more walkable, walkable, more bikeable, more beautiful, less street traffic, more robust tax base, and even better funding for the schools. As a city councilor, I will ensure that we rise to these challenges, as well as balancing the desires of all residents. So I want to close by saying thank you to everyone in this room tonight. You came out late. It's like 9 p.m. on a Thursday. Please reach out to me. You can also find me at justineunderhill.org if you have any questions. I'm here and I want to talk to every single one of you. A big reason that I'm here tonight is because of the amazing engaged community here. Thank you for being engaged citizens and supporting our democracy. It truly helps us become a better city. Thanks.
We thank everyone in the audience here and at home for your interest in this election. We also extend our sincere thanks to the candidates for being here tonight. Both VPIS and the League of Women Voters have posted voters' guides and questions and answers from council and school board candidates on the Vote for 11 website and VPIS on its website.
Voting is a right and a responsibility. Early voting began last Friday, September 22nd at City Hall. We hope you will vote on or before Election Day, Tuesday, November 7th. Thank you all, and good night.